Hey, this is Lisa Campion here, and today we're going to talk about how do we heal a broken heart. Hey, we've all been there, right? Dealing with a broken heart. I don't think we can get through life without being heartbroken a lot. Some of us are like almost like born heartbroken too. Like we just come into situations where we have to deal with a lot of grief right off the bat, difficult situations. And because I'm a psychic, I see actually people sometimes that are heartbroken in past lives and they're bringing that into it. Our poor little hearts, they really go through a lot as humans. And so we're going to talk about what do we do if you feel like you're heartbroken? Maybe you're going through a divorce or a breakup or the death of a loved one. We grieve so hard when our pets die, right? And we can also feel brokenhearted just when things change, even when things like really good things are changing. Maybe you move from an old house to a new house, and even if your new house is great, you can still grieve your old house. We can grieve phases of our life, like graduating from college. You can kind of grieve your past, who you were then. You're now in a different stage of your life. Maybe you feel really heartbroken if your kids move out and you're an empty nester. As things change and we evolve and grow, we experience loss and also good things. But in this video, we're talking about how do we deal with the loss. I think it really helps to understand the cycle of love. This is sort of a concept that the Greeks talked about, the Greek philosophers. They talked about love coming in three phases. There's eros, the beginning of love. There's agape, love sustained. And then there's thanatos, the ending of love. And this is kind of the cycle that we all go through. And eros is so fun. It's the beginning of that. We experience that in romantic love. We're kind of in the honeymoon stage of a relationship when it's all new and growing, or even when your kids are born, we experience that like flush of new love. It's so beautiful. Then agape, that middle part, is sort of the sustaining part of love sustained over time. And then there's thanatos, the ending of a love affair, or after somebody dies, or just that grieving, that loss when it's not there the same way that it was. And man, we all know this cycle. This is the natural phases of love. And I think fighting against this natural flow can cause us a lot of extra pain and struggle in our lifetimes. Yet we go through this cycle, even if you're married to the same person. Like my parents were married for 65 years and they were so adorable with each other. And then every once in a while they'd say, oh, we've fallen in love with each other again. They would go through these phases of that honeymoon phase, the just carrying on phase, and then something shifting or changing, or maybe not really there, and then starting again. Now, there's also kind of a timeless quality of love we experience in the heart, right? When we hold love, like our soul level knows that love exists beyond time. It's really eternal, in the way that when we love somebody, we never stop loving them at that level of the soul. They could break your heart, we still on a deep level love them. When they pass away, we still love them. There's something eternal about love. And yet our personality, our personal selves totally feel the loss of somebody when that situation changes and when they're not there anymore. And that's when we experience grief. So grief is what we feel, sort of the flip side of love. The more love you had here, the more grief you experience here when that love is changed, or or gone, or that person is gone, or that situation is gone. And when we block our grief and we don't process it, which most of us don't, we become numb. The heart shuts down. And grief is kind of the great heart opener, right? So when our hearts are pierced open by loss, we have an opportunity to open our hearts even more. I know it sounds crazy, but that's the way it can go. I think grief is like the most common human experience. It's something that unites us all. It's something we've all been through. And when we allow our hearts to open in compassion in grief, it's sort of a unifying force, because it's something that we experience across, doesn't matter, race, gender, social class, economic circumstances, time, we all have the same experience with grief. So, wow. When we allow grief to transform us, it's an incredibly initiatory experience. So as our hearts open and we are faced with loss, we have an opportunity for deep spiritual transformation. And sometimes we don't want to. It's a little bit through the eye of the needle, right? Nobody signs up for it. And yet when it's there, there's an incredible opening potential, I think processing grief is something that's really individual. We need to express our grief, and yet we don't really know how to do that. And there's really no right or wrong way to grieve. We've heard a lot about the stages of grief or how long grief is supposed to take. And I think that information is really interesting and useful. And it's not the be all and end all. Like how you grieve may be very different than how other people do. How you grieve this loss may be very different from how you grieve this loss. So we have to sort of feel our way through it and not make ourselves feel bad or wrong if it takes a long time. That's one thing that, especially in our Western culture, we kind of have like this 6-week time period, I don't know how long do you get leave from work, after a loss. And people come over and they send cards and they bring casseroles and they show up. And then after some, kind of a short amount of time, it's like that they're done with it and we may not be. So there's a little bit of turning away that people do with grief. Deep grief, especially if you've suffered a grief like losing a child, losing a partner, these unspeakable griefs, these untenable griefs, losses, other people get really freaked out and sometimes can't show up for that, oftentimes can't show up for that. And I don't know, it just seems to be the truth. I wish it wasn't, but that's the way it is. And I don't know, it makes some people uncomfortable. So a lot of times if we're really in deep grief, people can avoid us, expect you to be over it, not know how to show up for you. And if you're in that situation yourself, I think it's really great to tell people, ask people how to show up for you. Because I think it's more people are willing to do it if they know what might work for you. What do we do when the casserole phase is over? How do we keep showing up for somebody who's in deep grief? Ask them, how can I support you? Don't stop saying the names of people who have gone, talk about it. Maybe it's something that really somebody wants to talk about. Also, grief comes in waves. It sort of moves through our being, through our energy field, through our emotional body like a wave. And we can be fine in 1 minute, a wave comes through us. And I think it's really important to allow that to happen. One of the best cures for grief is tears. So really, don't be afraid to cry, to express your grief. Crying is one of the best cures for grief there ever is. And I think whatever you can do to express it, journal it, go to a grief support group. Sometimes it's really helpful to do that. Get grief counselors. There are special counselors who specialize in grief. And a lot of times hospitals or other places like that have loss counseling. And really feel deep compassion for yourself if that's something that is going on for you. I think the other thing here that needs to be handled is forgiveness. So grief is part of it and forgiveness is another part. So, often when there's a loss of a relationship, there's grieving to be doing, and there's maybe some forgiving that needs to be done too. Forgiveness is really a balm that heals the pain of the heart, but it's super hard to get there. And I think what happens with forgiveness is we start by, let's say you go through a divorce or a breakup of a relationship. There's going to be some forgiveness maybe that needs to be done there in order to really heal. It's impossible to heal from that if we're really holding on, if we're super holding a grudge. We haven't gone into forgiveness. And just so you know, there's a way we can forgive. Forgiving does not mean condoning bad behavior, abuse. If bad things happened, we can forgive in a way that doesn't mean we're condoning those things, right? So that's really important. And it takes some work to do some forgiveness. It's sort of again, like grief is a cycle, forgiveness is a cycle too. So we sort of start by deciding to forgive, then we go into like, I'm going to forgive my ex or my mother or whoever it is. And our mental mind really can see things from other people's point of view. So your mind might be like, I can see why that happened. And the heart sometimes needs more time to process that. A lot of what needs to happen in forgiveness is to really work through anger. So you might forgive somebody and then anger arises. Again, we get triggered, we get angry, like if you're going through a divorce or a breakup like that. And it's really important to express the anger in a healthy way where you don't target yourself or other people. You're going to do an anger workout, really, like punch a pillow or scream in your car or write in your journal. And then once we've shifted some anger, our hearts naturally fall back into a state of forgiveness. And this is something that you might have to repeat, rinse and repeat a whole bunch before you actually get there. And we also have to include ourselves in that cycle. So a lot of the forgiveness work actually comes down to forgiving ourselves for our parts in it, making bad decisions or decisions that led to pain, suffering for us and other people, whatever it is. So we have to include ourselves in that forgiveness cycle. So the bottom line here is find some way to ride the waves of grief when they're coming up. Feel a lot of compassion for yourself. Do a lot of self-expression. So journaling, writing, do some tapping. That's EFT, if you know what that is, to work through the grief and anger that comes with these deep changes that loss and heartbreak can bring us. So take good care of yourself, do lots of self-care, lots of nurturing. The other thing that people don't always know is that grief makes you really tired. And dealing with loss and dealing with heartbreak it can be quite exhausting. So a lot of times people who are grieving need a lot of extra rest, a lot of extra sleep. That's totally fine. You want to kind of go with that. And get support when you need it. Like if you feel really like you're not moving through it and you're really overwhelmed, this would be time to turn to help, to get some help, to talk to a therapist, a counselor, an energy healer, somebody who can help hold some space for you while you go through your heartache. And just know that on the other side of heartache, there's usually more love, because that's the cycle of love. So as we clean out this grief and anger and we go and we forgive and we grieve, it opens the heart for something new to come through. And that's the beautiful part. So I hope that's helpful. And thanks for being here and listening.